Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tome of Silver, the show where I randomly select a game from my collection, review it, and add it to an ever-growing ranking list. The Dark Souls franchise was always one I struggled to get into. The idea of a slower, more methodical style of action game was enticing, and the word of mouth regarding the game's notoriously difficult boss fights piqued my interest on many occasions. However, the game's choice in aesthetics would always be the barrier that would ultimately stop me from deciding to give it a try. Unfortunately, dark medieval fantasy has always been among some of my least favorite settings. When part of Dark Souls' intrigue is the player's engagement and exploration of that setting, I just never really got properly motivated to dive in. Fortunately, Souls-like games have really taken off these past few years, inspiring a multitude of titles that bring their own unique choice of setting to the table, and have since been able to dip my toe in several Dark Souls-style games, from Bloodborne, Strangers of Paradise, Nioh, and of course today's video, Code Vein. Does Code Vein manage to carve out its own niche, or is it just a hollow copy? Equip your Purifier Mask, drink some blood, and let's turn the page to Code Vein for the PlayStation 4. Taking place in a post-apocalyptic world, society has fallen apart following the event known as the Great Collapse, a calamity that brought forth monsters that began slaughtering much of the population. To fight back, humanity created a method to return deceased humans to life as beings called revenants. Revenants are vampiric-like beings who possess extraordinary abilities, but require constant blood to prevent themselves from going mad and becoming mutated creatures called the Lost. Over time, a thick miasma started to form in the air, which speeds up the corruption of revenants exponentially, forcing them to wear purifier masks whenever they're outside. Upon booting up the game, the player will be asked to create their own avatar, who will act as the primary protagonist of the story. I cannot gush enough about how much I love Code Vein's character creator. The number of options they provide, especially in regards to your character's hair and accessories you can equip, allows a refreshing amount of freedom. At the time Code Vein released, finding a game with such an extensive character creator was a rarity, and finding such a creator with an anime aesthetic was nigh a fantasy. Well, that fantasy is now real, and you can not only bring your own original characters to life, but you can also find all kinds of really cool recreations of existing characters from other franchises online. It can be oddly limited in some places. There's a disappointingly low amount of clothing options, and despite a ludicrous selection of eyes to choose from, your character's eye shape is tied to your choice of face, which is a bizarre limitation. But the good here more than makes up for the bad. I spent 2 hours in this creator trying to perfectly recreate my channel avatar, and I was overjoyed with the result. Once you've made your character, we start the story proper, waking up in the destroyed city of Vein, alongside a mysterious woman named Io, and wow, that's certainly quite the choice in outfit. Did you not get the memo that we're in a monster-infested city? Well, it's possible she just forgot, as both we and Io are suffering from amnesia. It isn't long before we meet Louis Amamiya, who, along with his companions, have been investigating a shortage of blood beads, an alternative to human blood, as well as the purpose of the Red Mist, an impenetrable barrier that has sealed its inhabitants inside the city, with no way of contacting the outside world. At surface value, the story and setting of Code Vein sounds like something someone would write during their rebellious teenage years right after finishing a rousing play session of Shadow the Hedgehog. A post-apocalyptic world where a bunch of badass vampires fight monsters using comically oversized weapons, all while they need to feed on blood, lest they succumb to the darkness within them. The boys are pretty and dressed in fashionable clothes, while the girls are equally as pretty and barely dressed at all. This is Code Vein. It all just sounds so over the top. But I have to admit, despite its grimdark premise, Code Vein manages to keep a consistent tone that isn't so silly as to undermine its setting, but also not so serious as to loop around to being ironically funny. Despite its anime aesthetics, Code Vein's characters avoid the usual tropes and exaggerated personalities, opting for a more grounded cast that acts closer to real human beings. The story setup does a lot for creating intrigue, throwing the player into this hellscape and planting the seeds of mystery and past events that instantly hooked me into wanting to discover more and learn about its world. Code Vein does a superb job in establishing its setting, and I was easily able to embrace it and start to think that it was genuinely cool, not just ironically. Really, the only part where I got snapped out of the world was its over-sexualization. I know, it's a Japanese game with anime elements. Sexualization is to be expected. And if it fits the character or makes sense in the world, I'm usually totally okay with that. And if you're someone who enjoys that stuff, more power to you. But its use in Code Vein was so distracting that it would more often than not get me to laugh and snap me right out of the experience. Take your team's weapons dealer, Murasame. Her backstory is that she used to be a commander of elite revenants, and was so feared for her prowess on the battlefield that she earned the nickname Yakusha, or Demon. Yet despite that, her outfit consists of an open jacket with an exposed bra and hot pants, all while this character is 16 years old. Then you have the female bosses like the pole dancing Hatsune Miku and the butterfly girl who is basically wearing a thong and pasties. Sex sells, I get it, but when it actively rips me out of the experience because of how baffling its use is, maybe it should have been toned down a bit. That aside, Code Vein's plot was good. It won't win any awards or anything, and I doubt there's anything here you haven't seen before, but it had enough going on to keep me invested and see it through to the end, and that's all it needed. The story is much more direct than its contemporaries. Instead of keeping the story vague and inviting discussion like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, most of Code Vein's story is just straight up explained through cutscenes. I did get a kick out of the game's cinematics, as they heavily feature your created character, which never failed to put a smile on my face, especially during the moments where they participated in some of the various fight scenes. Now, I debated including this part, as it is a spoiler, but I did feel it's important to include. If you don't want even the slightest bit of spoilers, skip ahead a few seconds to the timestamp. For the most part, Code Vein's story is perfectly standalone, and can be enjoyed in isolation. However, one of the plot's most significant reveals that they spend a good portion of the story building up to will mean absolutely nothing unless you're familiar with another Bandai Namco property. This leads to what's supposed to be one of the game's knock you out of your seat surprises into a wet thud. I'll say no more than that. Moving into gameplay, Code Vein is a third-person action game, bearing the hallmarks of the Souls-like genre in how it handles progression and death. Players will need to venture through various locations and slay the many enemies hidden around each corner. As they do, players will obtain haze, which acts as currency they can use to both level up and enhance certain abilities. Should you fall in battle, your character will drop all their unspent haze onto the ground, which the player will need to fight back to and retrieve. Should they fall again before managing to pick it up, all that haze is permanently lost forever. This is meant to invoke a constant feeling of tension. Players can't afford to be too reckless in their approach, lest they constantly lose their only means of leveling up, forcing them to be more methodical as they try to reach the next checkpoint. As you explore, players can find various types of weapons scattered around, each with their own particular moveset and attack speed, as well as blood veils, which acts as this game's armor. Code Vein is faster paced than usual Souls-likes. In games like Bloodborne, fighting 2 or 3 enemies at a time usually was a death sentence, and it strongly encouraged you to be more thoughtful in when and how you engage something. Meanwhile, it felt as though Code Vein put greater emphasis on speed and aggression, as you'll be placed in situations where you'll need to face hordes of enemies, instead of just one at a time. You'll want to make sure you're constantly laying in the cut too, as landing attacks are how you restore Ichor, which allows you to use your blood code. Blood codes is where Code Vein really comes into its own. Blood codes, for all intents and purposes, are like RPG classes, each altering your stats and providing skills, or as they're called here, gifts, specializing in a particular area, including increasing damage output, powerful melee attacks, ranged projectiles, support abilities, etc. The blood codes on their own offer a good variety, and odds are you're bound to find one that best fits how you wish to approach the game's various challenges. However, where the system truly starts to shine is through gift mastery. As you defeat enemies with gifts equipped, you'll eventually master that gift. What this does is allow you to use that gift without the blood code it originated from being equipped. This means as you slowly use multiple blood code, you'll have the option to mix and match gifts, ultimately creating a moveset uniquely your own. This allows for all kinds of crazy combinations, and offers a tremendous amount of replay value through experimentation. Even if you decide to focus on close quarters combat, there are still so many gifts to make things different. Perhaps you utilize skills themed around a particular element, like fire or venom. Or maybe you make a build that focuses on slowing stamina usage as much as possible, allowing you more opportunities to dodge while keeping up the offensive. There's a huge variety of options to play around with, and while I don't doubt this will allow for the creation of some builds that could snap the game's challenge in half, I think that's okay. If someone wants to put in the effort to create an overpowered build, they should be rewarded for their efforts, and that's exactly what Code Vein does. Each blood code doesn't have all the gifts available to use right out the gate, as some gifts require the player to find items called vestiges, scattered around various locations. On top of granting the player these additional skills, they are also the primary method of gaining new insight into the cast and their backstories. The way these backstories are portrayed is particularly interesting, as they play out almost like a diorama that the player gets to walk through, with the environment reflecting the tone of the scene. I've never been crazy about constant flashbacks as the main method of fleshing out characters. I've seen enough Naruto to be sick of it for a lifetime. But if they had to do it, I'm glad they went for such a unique approach. They can be a little slow, especially if you do multiple back-to-back, but if one really isn't jiving with you and you just want to get the skill, there is the option to skip over them. These vestiges play a role in what ending you receive, as Code Vein has 3 different endings, depending on how many of a particular type of vestige you restore. So if you want the best ending, you'll want to make sure you're searching every nook and cranny for them. Thankfully, finding these vestiges isn't too difficult, though it may not appear that way at first. Each location is very labyrinthian in design, with lots of winding pathways that lead to dead ends. However, Code Vein has an anti-frustration feature in its map, which uses little dots to indicate if you've walked through a particular area before. This allowed me to easily know if I was just looping the same area over and over again, or actually making progress, and allowed me to efficiently explore each map to completion with little issue. This was a fantastic feature. These dots do disappear after a good while, I think when you move on to a new area, but as long as you're putting in the effort to clear out the current location, this shouldn't be a problem. Code Vein can be a little rough to start out, and can take some time to get used to its mechanics. The game front-loads you with all kinds of tutorials, which can be difficult to digest and fully understand, especially since they use all kinds of unfamiliar terminology like Ichor, Gifts, and Haze, which the player will need to understand right off the cuff. Code Vein could have benefited greatly from a more gradual build-up of mechanics. With how much the game has going on, learning almost everything in a single tutorial section makes it easy for certain things to fall by the wayside. There was something called quick drain attacks that I didn't even know existed, so there was this whole move that I just wasn't using because of how overloaded I was from the jump. Another critique I have is the parry. By pressing the left shoulder button before an enemy's attack hits, you can block the blow and parry, dealing massive damage to the attacker. However, the parry took far longer to activate than I found comfortable, with the parry window not activating until a few seconds after you hit the button. I just couldn't get used to the timing, leading to me getting hit 2/3 of the time I tried. This is not to mention that armors have different parry timings, meaning that they may be a bit faster or slower depending on what you have equipped. As if I didn't struggle enough with the parry, if I switch my armor, I may have to get used to an entirely new parry window, and I found it really worth the trouble. Overall, the challenge of Code Vein is fairly comfortable by the usual standards of the genre. It's still more challenging than most action games, make no mistake. Enemies can still hit you like a truck, and bosses will grind you into a fine powder if you're not sufficiently prepared. However, what makes Code Vein easier is its use of a partner character, allowing you to select a teammate to join you in battle, each with their own gifts that can make up for an area you may be weak in. Personally, I always use Yakumo, as the man is easily the heaviest hitter, and he's voiced by Robbie Daymond. Aside from just being an extra source of damage, partners can sometimes draw the attention of bosses away from you, providing you a precious opportunity to heal. And even should you lose all your health, your partner has a brief window to transfer half of their current health to you, immediately getting you back up on your feet. This revival isn't a guarantee, as the ability has a cooldown period, and if the boss is throwing your partner around like a ragdoll, your teammate may not have the time necessary to cast it. But it still provided an opportunity to turn a losing battle around. Personally, I didn't struggle against the boss fights too much, as I was usually able to beat them in 1 or 2 tries, barring a few exceptions, and I don't doubt this was in no small part to my partner. For those who are turned off by the idea of needing to have a backup in a game like this, there is an option to turn the teammates off and go it solo. Unfortunately, it's clear in a number of sections that the game is balanced around you having a second person at your side. Remember those sections I mentioned earlier where you're occasionally tasked with fighting swarms of enemies at a time? With a partner allowing you to divide and conquer, these moments are challenging but manageable. With one person, they become downright unfair, quickly overwhelming you and being able to attack you from off screen while you deal with the other threats in front of you. There's also a particular boss fight that will push your shit in if you're fighting solo. if having a partner isn't appealing to you, I think it's better to skip over this one. I rather liked having the partner, not because the game was too difficult, but because I liked the feeling of companionship, fighting through tough battles with characters I like. It just adds a little something to the whole experience. When not exploring the city of Vane, you'll be brought back to your home base, where you can take a break and perform a handful of activities. Here you can buy items and upgrade your current equipment, as well as talk to your various companions to get their insight on the situation at hand. When you do, you have the opportunity to give them presents found scattered throughout the various maps. Providing them with presents they really like will grant you points that can be exchanged for exclusive items and weapons. Your companions may also provide you with presents of their own in turn, which will grant you a healthy amount of haze, so that's always worth doing. You can also go to the base's hot spring. It just wouldn't be an anime without a hot spring. Aside from just hanging out under the moonlight, you can view memories and cutscenes, as well as retrieve half of your haze you may have dropped in an area you know you probably won't be able to easily return to. Finally, you can speak with an NPC, Davis. Davis has no role in the story of Code Vein, but speaking with him can allow you to explore the depths. The depths are essentially extra dungeons you can do alongside the main story. Along with new vestiges to find, the depths offer various challenges and opportunities to earn some extra haze in between story missions. I didn't feel I really needed to explore the depths, I was leveling up just fine and the exclusive vestiges didn't appeal to me. But they're extra little areas to explore if they catch the player's interest. They don't scale to your current level, so if you're planning to do them, I recommend completing them as soon as you unlock the newest area, or you'll be too overleveled and it'll just be boring. Presentation-wise, Code Vein is a nice looking game. The art style kind of mixes anime aesthetics with some more realistic elements, which gives it its own unique visual style. Character models do have the nasty habit of clipping through parts of each other, especially when it comes to the hair, which more often than not ends up phasing through the character's purifier masks. The environments suffer from the same problems most apocalyptic games do, where the environments are bleak and not all that visually interesting. Even the few times the story takes you away from dilapidated wastelands, it either takes you to places that are very visually repetitive, or just aren't all that unique. As for sound, the music of Code Vein was solid. I can't see myself listening to most of the tracks on my own time, but it certainly makes good use of a choir and grandiose instruments to make each battle feel important, which is certainly effective when it's playing in the moment. I will say that the vocal tracks were awesome, and immediate adds to my Spotify playlist, especially Underworld and In This Hell, both sung by the group Vamps. When Underworld started playing during the encounter with Jack in the cathedral, it gave immediate early 2000s YouTube AMV vibes. Cheesy? No doubt. Was it the moment I realized I loved this game? You better believe it. The voice acting was equally as good. I used the English voices during my playthrough, and everyone gave a pretty great performance. I especially enjoyed Keith Silverstein as antagonist Juzo Mido.
I gave your precious Eva a little present. You're under the impression that you allowed her to escape. That is incorrect. I allowed her to escape.
Because each character wears a mask, Code Vein often manages to sidestep the issue of needing to match up the voice to the character's mouth movements. That said, there were a few instances that I felt could be chalked up to poor direction, where a character's delivery just didn't really seem to match up with their actions.
Take him somewhere safe.
You owe me for this.
We writhe with this terrible thirst. We live in fear of joining the ranks of the lost, and for whose sake? It's all in the service of humans. If blood is the only price they have to pay, then they have a pretty good deal.
This isn't the voice actor's fault, they're delivering the lines as they're being directed, and these moments are not overly common either, but there are a few moments to be improved upon. Lastly, I did have the game crash on my PlayStation 5 4 times during my playthrough, twice during a cutscene right after beating a boss. The game has a pretty good autosave system, though I did have to fight the respective bosses all over again. While I did say that the bosses weren't too tough and were beatable in a few tries, this nevertheless would put me in a bad mood. Bosses in these kinds of games are supposed to be the primary draw, and the feeling of accomplishment you have finally overcoming them is unmatched. So when I beat a boss, only to have the game crash and have that victory snatched away from me, it often left me feeling a bit sour. Overall, I thoroughly loved my time with Code Vein, and perhaps controversially, it's one of my favorite Souls-like games. I'm such a sucker for the character creator, and how much they commit to that character's involvement in scenes. Combat is fun, and the Blood Code lets you play around with all kinds of builds which can consistently keep the experience feeling new. Some environments could be better, and not every part of the combat works perfectly. But the good of Code Vein really clicked with me, and even now makes me think of making a new character and going through it again. Code Vein will drain Tokyo Mirage Sessions of its number 9 spot, pretty damn high in the ranking list. I really hemmed and hawed about putting it higher than Soul Calibur 2, and if Code Vein's story blew me away, it just might have taken it. But even still, it made it to the single digits, so that's pretty impressive. And that's all for Anime Souls. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Next time, we'll be returning to Mega Man X, and it'll be a bit of a double whammy, as the next 2 titles are very similar and aren't worth having their own 2 separate videos. Please look forward to that. In the meanwhile, thank you all so much for watching. Take care, and may we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.